Hi guys, welcome back to Codemaster Coach, your medical coding tutor. We're continuing our studies of the 2019 ICD-10-CM Coding Guidelines. We are down to Chapter 1, and we're going to wrap up our studies on AIDS with the next two videos. So, continuing where we've stopped on the last video, let's look at our guideline and let's further discuss. Alright, guideline states, we're down to Chapter 1, C. C says, whether the patient is duly diagnosed. Whether the patient is newly diagnosed or has had previous admission or encounters for HIV conditions is irrelevant to the sequencing decision. Notice that it says it is irrelevant. D, asymptomatic. Asymptomatic means without symptoms. Human immunodeficiency virus. Z21, asymptomatic human immunodeficiency virus HIV infection status is to be applied when the patient without any documentation of symptoms is listed as being HIV positive or known HIV or HIV test positive or similar terminology. Do not use this code if the term AIDS is used or if the patient is treated for any HIV-related illness or described as having any condition resulting from his or her HIV positive status. Use B20 in these cases. And E, patient with inconclusive HIV serology. Patients with inconclusive HIV serology, but no definitive diagnoses or manifestations of the illness may be assigned R75, inconclusive laboratory evidence of human immunodeficiency virus. And then F, previously diagnosed HIV-related illness. Patients with any known prior diagnoses of an HIV-related illness should be coded to B20. Once a patient has developed an HIV-related illness, the patient should always be assigned B20 on every subsequent admission or encounter. Patients previously diagnosed with any HIV illness, B20 should never be assigned to R75 or Z21, asymptomatic human immunodeficiency virus HIV infection status. All right, so let's put that in our terms. What are we saying here? First, going back to C, whether the patient is newly diagnosed, and it said whether the patient is newly diagnosed or has had a previous admission or encounter for HIV conditions is irrelevant to the sequencing decision, because once that patient is HIV and they have symptoms of HIV or they are diagnosed as having AIDS, they are B20 no matter what. Your principal diagnoses will always be B20. Under D, where it said asymptomatic human immunodeficiency virus, that Z21 code, Z21 means that they tested positive. You can test positive for AIDS and not have any symptoms, not even know you had AIDS. If had it not been for the test, you wouldn't have known that you had AIDS. So in that case, if you are asymptomatic, without symptoms, asymptomatic, the A means without, absence of. Asymptomatic, without symptoms of HIV, but you test positive for HIV, that's a Z21 code, okay? And in other words, this patient will not have any other conditions or symptoms. They just tested positive. That's a Z21. The next one talked about patient with inconclusive HIV serology. You can take an AIDS test and it not be positive and it not be negative. It's just inconclusive. At that time, you have some positive factors that come into play, but yet they can't say that you seriously have HIV. So your test comes back inconclusive. So if you have an inconclusive HIV test, your diagnosis is an R75. That just means you're needing to come back and get another test, and they give you a time limit, I can't remember what it is, to come back and take the test again to see whether or not you truly test positive for AIDS. So that's the R75. So again, R75. No diagnoses. You did not test positive. You don't have any manifestations, but your test was inconclusive. So notice the difference between a Z21, where you test positive, an R75, where you don't test positive or negative, an actual B20, full-blown AIDS. So if you have no prior diagnoses of HIV-related conditions, but you test positive, that's a Z21. But if you have a known history of AIDS or an AIDS-related condition, you are a B20. And you can never go from a B20 back to an R75, which is inconclusive, or a Z21 where you just test positive but you have no symptoms. Once you're a B20, you're always a B20. You can go from an R75, an inconclusive HIV test, to a Z21 where you actually test positive and don't have symptoms. But once you go to a B20 full-blown AIDS, you will always be a B20. Once you come in for AIDS-related conditions and it's tested back, it goes back to prove that AIDS caused that pneumonia or that, what's another one? It's an infection of the tongue. Oh, I can't think of it. Candidiasis of the tongue. Those are symptoms of AIDS or AIDS-related. It can be an AIDS-related condition. Once you test positive for an AIDS-related condition, you're always a B20. You can never go back. All right, so I hope I've broken down the difference between a Z21 where you test positive. Actually, let's go back even further. R75, inconclusive. It didn't test positive, it didn't test negative. You come back in, oops, it tested positive, but you have no symptoms of AIDS. That's a Z21. And then once you have AIDS, you have that Z25, you tested positive, and you don't have any symptoms, you're still a Z21. But once you ever hit an AIDS-related condition or experience some symptoms of AIDS that kind of proves that you do have it, once you become a B20, you are always a B20. All right, guys, I hope I broke that down between a R75, a Z21, and a B20. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one.